For me, designing my classroom is one of my most favorite things to do every year. It is one of my most favorite things and reasons to like go back to school and start getting things ready and getting things organized and designed for the students to come in on the first day and be wowed by the classroom that they're walking into. Today, I want to talk about 5 ways that I haven't talked about before because I've made a lot of these videos over the last 8 years. I'll make a playlist and put it up here or in the description below so you can check those out. But 5 ways I haven't talked about before that I love to think about when I'm trying to create an incredible classroom. Here we go. So the first thing I really try and think about when I'm doing this is fun. I think it is often the most overlooked aspect of classrooms, especially for middle, but especially high school. Going to elementary schools, there's fun's all over the place. Fun is happening everywhere. But for some reason, we try to, steer towards more serious stuff with high school students. And so here's a couple ways I've looked at fun in my classroom. This is a picture of my classroom in West Philly. A lot of the aspects in here have what I like to refer to as zero educational value. So for instance, I have this giant, I think it's like a 9-foot tree that is made out of driftwood. And you might be asking yourself, Reynolds, did you get scabies when you brought that into your room? Yes, I did. And that's a different story. Things like I have all these flying books up here on my ceiling. And look, I realize that this is one of those things that you may get in trouble for, right? Like you might have to ask your school for any number of things. And hanging flammable objects from the ceiling is questionable in some schools. But I would say this, it's not about doing exactly what I'm talking about here. It's can you think of the spirit of that. And one of the things I'm going to talk about later is looking at your room differently. But I made this for a dystopian version of Macbeth, the tree I made. And when we were done, I had 2 of them, one on each side of the stage. Instead of just getting rid of them, I decided to put them in my classroom. That's also where I got the couch, which is not necessarily fun, but was also a stage prop for something. Now, instead of just having regular old bookshelves, I made these floating bookshelves in my classroom because I wanted books to look like something kids might want to go over to. But what I didn't care for, and these shelves actually changed, but if you can see over here, I have bookshelves here, and under each shelf, so these are just regular laminate shelves that I put a plywood facing on, and then behind that plywood facing, I just bought, this is way less technical than it actually sounds maybe. I put lights that I bought from Amazon underneath and it illuminated them. So the idea on these shelves was to have all the books facing out, because if you go to the YA section of any bookstore, Barnes & Noble or otherwise, or even Target, all the YA books are face out because that's how they sell, because indeed we do judge a book by its cover. Other fun things, I have this cityscape of Philadelphia up here that I made out of trash. I have street art on the wall over here. There's just any number of elements, like a giant chalk whale that is there as a reminder to me, has nothing to do with the children. But it is this idea of just instituting or implementing a bit of fun in your classroom. Now, I'm also a big believer in having a bit of yourself and a bit of your students in your classroom. So having things students can walk in and see and identify that look like somewhere about where they come from. So for instance, the Philadelphia thing or street art might be one of those things in my classroom. But I also wanted to have a bit about who I was, right? So there's a little bit of our school history. The skateboard comes from a class trip. This is from a time that we went to, I think that's the Costa Rican flag. We went to Costa Rica. It's either Costa Rica or Belize. Sorry that I didn't know that. It might be the cityscape of Philadelphia. I want to have a little bit of who I am and a little bit of who my students are as well. And then here you can see these ledges that I made out of plywood. You can just get simple ledges from just about anywhere, sell something like this, with a number of outward facing books as well, with the hopes that kids would go over, like the cover, and then want to pick that up. The next thing I think is huge in classroom design is consistency. Now, I think consistency is by and large I won't say it's the number 1, but it's up there with regards to classroom management. It's one of the biggest factors in classroom management. When we're talking about classroom design in a way where we're thinking about where does homework go? when kids walk into your room? Where are they picking up items? So are they grabbing their do now or their bell ringer on the front desk? Is it by their seat already? Is it in a special folder? If you were late, if you were absent, where are you getting the stuff that you need? And so by building in these rhythms into classroom and having consistency with those rhythms, what you're going to do is reduce downtime. A kid walks in late, they're not...
Mr. Reynolds, I was late. Where do I get the paper?
You already know where the paper is. You already know where your journal is. You already know if you need an extra pencil or an extra pen. Anything that you might need to make class successful, you know where those things are, and we're building in that level of consistency so that you don't have to ask, I don't have to stop teaching so I can tell you, and I'm also empowering you to be responsible and take care of business. Next, one of my favorites, this isn't for everyone, but it's for me. Label everything. I label everything. And I took this to a new level recently. I was working with an educator in a school in Texas, an art teacher. And one of the things that we started talking about was something I started doing here at home. I was tired of my own children taking like gardening tools back to the garage and then not putting them back in the well-organized fashion in which I had created. So I started creating pictures that I hang in my garage. Don't get jealous about my art because I'm really good at drawing stuff. I started drawing pictures of whether it's the rake or the shovel that looks like a balloon or the tiny rake because I can't think of another item. They are labeled, but there's also an image that goes next to it. So if you have art supplies, if you have science equipment, if you have a shelf of telescopes and you want students to put it back exactly, I say just labeling it, and if you can get a picture, get it printed out at your local drugstore for like 32 cents, and there's always a 50% off coupon for some reason, but creating an image and a label for everything. So in my own classroom, I have labels on everything. You'll see them sometimes mislabeled. They're on boxes and suitcases. This whole box that I got from a yard sale somewhere, every single one is just what goes in there. So this is just glue, just Crayola markers, just Mr. Sketch markers, just labels, just Expo markers, just Sharpies. Everything has a label on it back here. Why? Because I want students to know where things are, and I want to remind them when they're cleaning up where to put it back. I don't like to waste time in transitions, and one of the biggest places that we lose time in transitions is getting kids to get stuff and getting kids to hand in stuff. So if I can label things, it makes it easier. So if a student says, hey, Mr. Reynolds, where can I get more staples? The stapler's out. They're in the back behind my desk. It says staples on it. And then the student knows exactly where they are. It's the only thing in there. Easy. Moving along. Look at the whole room. Don't think when folks are designing rooms, they do enough to look at everything that's in the room. So back to my example from before, when thinking about designing a classroom, I started thinking about my ceiling. How could I incorporate the ceiling into the classroom design? I have other friends that will put lights on their ceiling. They put tapestries on their ceiling. My one buddy Shivy, I talked about in the previous video last year when I was talking about this, who he paints different flags from different countries on his ceiling tiles to represent all the students in his class, because he wants kids that come in that may feel disconnected because they just got here, that they can feel like they belong and that they're seen because their flag is on the ceiling. Another way that I used to do this, and I couldn't find the picture for it, but I have a whole bank of windows on the one end of my classroom. And getting window markers, especially like a big fat white, like it looks like a Magnum marker, and drawing on the windows can be really fun for students, really useful for you, and it's a great place of transition that you can change regularly, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And it comes off super easy. You just need some Windex. Most of it just comes off with a whiteboard eraser, but if you need it, you can just use Windex or any kind of glass cleaner for it. But it's thinking about your whole classroom. So looking around and not just looking at your shelves, your desks, your tables and things of that nature. You're looking at the entire classroom and thinking, what could be possible? Is there something you could do on your rug or somewhere else on your floor, on your doors, inside of your closets, inside of your cabinets? how could you look at this space differently? And I'll tell you, one of the best ways to do this is to stand somewhere different in your room. Stand on a shelf, on a filing cabinet in a corner of your classroom, and just give yourself a different view of your classroom so you'll come up with different sorts of ideas. The last thing that I have for you is making an area that changes regularly. I started doing this some years ago when I started taking over bulletin boards in the hallways that no one wanted to do anything with. Like the bulletin board that said back to school until April, or the one that for some reason, I don't know why they do this. Do you ever think about this? Why do they make bulletin boards the same height as backpacks? So every kid that walks down the hallway is banging into it or scraping against it and it just gets messed up. I think all bulletin boards should be just above backpack level. However, I took back bulletin boards and I just started making them fun. And sometimes they were ridiculous, sometimes they were meaningful, but the idea here was to create something new so kids would see them. And I thought, well, department stores do this in their windows, why don't we do this in schools? So I started creating certain spaces in my classroom that would change over time. Now, back to this image, one of the easy ways to do that is when I have bookshelves, right? So I will put different books, I change these out every time I get in new books. When there's a seasonal change in books, when there's a subject matter that we're going over. So if we're talking about the dystopian future, I might have all dystopian novels. If we're talking about the literary canon, I might have something over here. Whatever it is that we're focusing on as a school or as a class that month, I try to make this a transitory spot. Now, another thing that I could not find an image for, because after 8 years, your organization gets a little wacky on YouTube, but one of my walls was painted black. And I would use chalk on that wall to create new art for each thing that we were learning. So if we were learning about, if we were reading of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, I might draw the set in chalk on the wall. If we were coming up with words or phrases that meant something to us, a quote that meant something to us, I'd have all students draw on the wall. So this was a spot that I could use for different things over time. Windows work just as well, bulletin boards work just as well. I realized that not everyone's allowed to paint walls black in their school, which is a shame because it's awesome. Could you use bulletin boards? Could you keep changing your door art? Could you have a section of shelves in your room that each season, each quarter, or each month, you're changing that look, and it just creates something fresh. It creates something new for kids to come in. It creates excitement to come into the classroom and see, oh my gosh, it's the first of the month. What are they going to do now? And sometimes we would have reveals in class. Sometimes it would just be things that just kids would see. Sometimes it was stuff that kids didn't notice till it was just about to come down because, I don't know, sometimes kids don't notice stuff. But what could you do to look at your classroom and figure out some things that are fun, that bring a level of consistency, that you could label to lead to easy cleanup, or that you could use to make a change regularly in your classroom? It's just a couple ideas, gang. I have a video that I made the other day on things I don't do in the classroom anymore, and that might be a good one for you to kind of look at. Also, and like I said, there's gonna be a playlist down below. Gang, if you're new to this game of education, I have a checklist just for you. You can also find that link in the description below. That is about, I don't know, 25 or 30 things that I like to do before school starts that are easy, that are gonna set you up for a different level of success this year in school. That's it for this one, gang. Peace.